Good evening, I'm Eugene Chan with Straight Talk. Our guest tonight is Mr. David Lee. He is a well-established businessman, and more recently, he has played a leading role in several Hong Kong-Taiwan organizations and currently the chair of the Taiwan Economic and Cultural Cooperation and Promotion Council. He is also on the National Committee of the CPPCC. So with that experience, Mr. Lee is going to tell us if cross-strait diplomacy is at a crossroad. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Eugene.
As many people know, the U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, despite numerous warnings from Beijing Foreign Ministry, has really escalated cross-strait tensions with a series of military operations by the Mainland People's Liberation Army around the island. Why was this visit so controversial? I mean, as we know, there are other politicians who have visited Taiwan. And why is Pelosi's visit so significant in that sense?
Well, first of all, I think the U.S. and many other countries has signed a treaty with the mainland, our country, that there is only one China policy. And so to have the sort of such a high rank leadership in this government or the political structure of a country that visiting Taiwan is in breaching of the agreement. I think that is one of the main reasons, but also Beijing doesn't want anybody to have any illusion about there's only one China policy. And one thing I think is very important that I'm sorry to say that, for example, you say diplomacy. Between the mainland or the cross-strait, there are no diplomacy because it's not a state-to-state relationship. It's only an internal affair. So we always use it as a relationship between Beijing and Taipei. But that is our internal affair. So we do not, I think Beijing doesn't want anybody to interfere our internal affair. I mean, that is a very strict and strong position by our government.
Right. Thank you for clarification. But the context we use for diplomacy is for a descriptive of a relationship rather than on that level. But I think there's a very good point you have made. As you mentioned about the visit, I mean, even in the U.S., some, including even the former U.S. senator, called the trip being reckless and dangerous. Do you agree?
Absolutely. I think I have been talking during the week before the visit with some friend of mine who used to be working in the State Department as specialized in the North Asia area, and both of them give me the same advice and think that the trip will happen, but they think it's a mistake because unfortunately the U.S. in my opinion that the U.S. government is not facing the reality of today's world. First of all, I think their intelligence is not very, not as strong as they have before. If you look at Afghanistan, when they were saying that the President of the United States saying that in 6 months' time, we are doing the retreat, but it happened in 6 days. Everything's gone the other way. And also, I'm sure that there's a lot of think tanks is looking at the Ukraine situation before pressurizing the Russian, but it turned out to be a very sort of different outcome. And I think Taiwan, the cross-strait relationship, I think also some of the American people are misreading the whole situation about China reaction to it. I mean, Beijing is definitely saying that. I mean, they of course know that Beijing doesn't want to start a war. That's why you can see that in this process, at the end of the trip, you see that the U.S. Navy is moving away from Taiwan. That is a very strong signal to tell our friends in Taiwan that nobody is joining you if there is any military confrontation.
Right. When you said reckless and dangerous, which you agree, why would you agree to that statement then?
Because I think I think they are not looking at the big picture of the interests of the United States, the people of the United States. I think today the Sino-US relationship is something that not the US nor China can avoid to have a dialogue and also understanding of each another and needs and wants. There is no one-sided domination in that respect. So I think, if you make a move that your counterpart is going to be very upset, I think it's reckless. And then also, and the situation or the response from Beijing, I think is expected, but it seems like quite surprised to some of the US.
So David, you mentioned the term on China policy. For the benefit of the viewers, maybe you can give a brief background of what it is. Does Taiwan actually recognize it? Does the rest of the world recognize it? As before the show, I had a quick chat with you. I said I've done some research. And in 1972 in Shanghai, there was a document signed saying that there's only one China. And in 1978, where US actually agreed to cut all the formal diplomatic ties with Taiwan, and whoever wants to recognize mainland as the Chinese government will have to cut ties with Taiwan. So that's as much as we have, and also we have the 92 consensus as well. Maybe you can give the viewers a very brief background, what we ought to know.
Well, I think it's very clear to everyone in the political world, not only China, who have all the countries who have a diplomatic relationship with China had signed a very standard treaty that there's a one China policy. And Taiwan is part of China. There's no debate about it. I think there is less than 10% of the country that you really need to have been working very hard with your geography to find out where they are and understand where is their capital. So that's something that, I think is a very minority countries. But I think more important is not who they are, but also that Beijing only, if you look at the US, you look at Great Britain, you look at EU, Canada, okay? Canada is one of the earliest Western countries who have a diplomatic relationship with China, and they have signed a one-country policy. So they only recognize Beijing as the legitimate China representative in the world stage. So, and from Taiwan's perspective, in 1992, there is a very famous 92 consensus between the representative of the Taiwan entity and also Beijing representative have signed an understanding. I don't think that at the time there is any argument that there's one China. The argument could be only as the China is PRC or ROC. And now why Beijing is very concerned, because every time we talk about Taiwan issue, we want to bring everybody back to 92 agreement, is that if there is no one China agreement, then there's nothing to talk about because we have no basis.
But the 92 consensus actually signed in Hong Kong,
yes.
Wasn't it? Yes. So David, before we go to the break, I want to ask you, the White House reiterated there's no change to the one China policy that you have just said, and that they do not support Taiwan independence. But does Pelosi's visit consistent with this? Do you have any comments on that?
Unfortunately, I think it is not what the White House think. There is two parties in the whole agreement. So I think it's very important that we have to understand Beijing's consideration of the matter. And when Beijing say to Washington, many times officially through the Foreign Office and through the embassy in Washington, saying that this is not something that we will appreciate, please stop and don't do this, this is breaking our agreement. I think that already said very much,
right.
So 50% of the agreement is not effective.
Right, so does this erode the trust with mainland to US through this incident?
I think trust is very thin between the two nations right now, because I think the US is thinking that, we are a very strong competitor. Yes, we are a strong competitor, but many rules are not set by China. China is just playing the international rules. Everybody's playing. But when we are doing better as a result, you're not happy with it, then I think you are changing the rules in the middle of it.
So with all this, do you think this is U.S. start, although they are making a statement, as you just said, you said it takes two parties for a view, is this at the beginning of them kind of declaring opening support to kind of a bit towards the independence of Taiwan?
No, I don't think the U.S. will officially come out and say supporting Taiwan to be independent, because that is not in the U.S. interest. I think the U.S. want to maintain, as always, maintain the cross-strait relationship as it was in 1972.
Right.
That's why they signed the three agreements in Shanghai.
In Shanghai, yeah.
But I think that is not possible, because Taiwan has changed. Taiwan, in the last 20, 30 years, they have been progressing into what we call the Western democracy. Unfortunately, everything is they're looking at a different product to sell. Okay. Some selling one, some selling diplomacy and independent of Taiwan.
David, maybe we will have a break first, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. With us tonight is David Lee, who has been giving us his perspectives on the current cross-strait events. So David, in the first part of the show, you have explained to the viewers some of the background, or in short, what is one China policy. And it is in your opinion that it is not in the U.S. interest if they're going to push further to Taiwan independence, or actually maybe starting a war. That's something that we have discussed in the first half. And interestingly, with the statement from the G7, they accused us, or mainland China, of using this visit as a pretext for aggressive military activity in the Taiwan Strait. They maintain that it's normal and routine for legislators from the countries to go and visit other places. How will you respond to that?
Well, I think G7 or whoever are making comments about I would consider internal affair, and of course they don't like this and that, but doesn't mean that I have to follow. So I think we are dealing this matter as an internal affair. We want to make sure that the people of Taiwan understand that this is not something that we can discuss on principle, issue or matters. I think that is what I believe Beijing is trying to send the message across to people in Taiwan. Unfortunately, I also have been in the last 30 years traveling between cross-strait, and I try to also explain to my friends in Taiwan that there are certain bottom line or red line that you can not cross, and you can try to get your space and give him more time. That's something you want, but also have to follow certain rules, and I think that's unfortunately is not heard. For example, Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, the most easy way out for everybody, for the U.S. as well as for Beijing or for Taiwan, is that they just find an excuse that it's not convenient now. Why don't you come back in November? For example, that is an option. And also I think you hear a lot of the strong statement. One thing good about it, my understanding is that because of this visit, you can see the U.S. DoD, Department of Defense, is sending two naval fleet in the Indo-Pacific fleet to Taiwan, accompany the visit, and then right after that they just left. So you can see that from the press conference by Joseph Wu, the gentleman who in charge of their foreign affair in Taiwan, had made a statement that we understand that if there's a conflict, nobody will join us. So I think it is very clear that for everybody it's not a very good exercise for Nancy's visit.
Right, thank you for that view. David, recently President Xi and President Biden had a phone call, and from what is reported, it said that Xi told Biden that those who play with fire will perish by it. And one former Singaporean minister thinks that it is a provocation by the US side and has been orchestrated very carefully so that they cannot be accused. For example, President Biden said that I don't think it's a good idea to visit Taiwan, but I can't stop Pelosi from going. So do you agree that U.S. is trying to play really political maneuver here to get what they want? Or actually, what do they want?
I think, of course, if you look at the U.S. Parliamentary system, the Congress is higher than the government. So, of course, there is truth in it. But I think any congressman in the United States, they should act in the interests of the country. So when your government is saying that please don't go, you say no, I have to go. You are taking your interests greater than the national interest, and I think that is something that in any system is not acceptable. So I would say that I can understand why Beijing say, well, this is not something that I can appreciate or understand, or even saying to anybody who in the U.S. with a objective view, I think the national interest in any country is always greater than any individual. So like for us in Hong Kong.
Some even say that, a sort of view saying that if U.S. can push China into, say, an initiating conflict, so they will unite the Western world against China. So do you think the mainland responses have been playing into U.S. hands so far?
Well, I think, the Western world be united together. I think that is each individual's, in my view, is their choices. I don't think China will say you should not or you should. That is something that I think no country can say that. But what I think is that people tend to neglect the most important part, that Taiwan is an internal matter in China. And so China have signed agreement with EU, that EU agree that there's a one China policy. So whatever I'm doing here, I'm not trying to do anything is not human or killing people like a killing fields. I'm just telling my kids, please behave, okay?
Right. Some of the U.S. officials say that there's a high risk of an accidental clash now, especially now the mainland has suspended all their dialogue with the U.S. defense. So what is from your view, what's the risk of that happening? And if it does happen, unfortunately, what will be the consequences?
Well, I think from the U.S. perspective, I think it's quite, not quite, if I say it's quite a joke, if I may use that a bit light worded, because, the Taiwanese military or let's say their aircraft or their missile is all coming from the U.S., most of them. That is functioning. So, if the U.S. is not giving them anything, there's no dangers, there's no risk for that matter. And also, I think any conflicts is always there's a risk. And I think everybody has to be sensible. That's why I said earlier in other meetings with friends and so forth, I said, it is concerned. I am concerned very much because of the whole situation is not stable. And then also there is no back channel between Taiwan and Beijing. So there's no communication. So there could be many misreading on one's behavior. So that is very dangerous. But now is not the time to talk. I think now is the time to say I'm very concerned about, from Beijing perspective, I want you to understand this is not acceptable. So you do this, I want to make sure that you're not going to do it next time. So whatever is Beijing respond now is that make it very clear.
Right, David, earlier you said the relationship between mainland and the U.S. is very thin at the moment, and we are responding by no dialogue with the U.S. Department of Defense, some trade, probably personal sanctions with that happening. Is that going to be effective?
Well, I think, first of all, sanction is a means by each country. So we, in China, we sanction some of the U.S. Congress or Senate people and the government official as well. And the U.S. also sanctions our officials in Beijing and Hong Kong. But I think that is not the reason why we back down on our principle. So we have each believe in certain things, and we want to maintain that. So there's not a matter of right or wrong.
Right, David. As you know, the world has been in a bit of turmoil in the last few years. Mm-hmm. We had the COVID pandemic. Now with the Russian and Ukraine war still happening, do you think this kind of I won't say conflict, but this crisis, will it push will it make our country closer to Russia?
Well, I think that we always been close to Russia, because if you look at trade and in both ways, Russia is also a very big buyer from China, especially light industry products, and we are also a big buyer from the Russian industry, including military, like fighter jet. But I think China is not trying to be friends with one country. That's how I see it. So I think you can see that our foreign minister, Mr. Wang Yi, has mentioned it almost every time I hear what he's saying, is that we are hoping to have a multilateral dialogue. Yeah. So we're not trying to have a dialogue with one country, but we try to have a dialogue because China is honestly and seriously participating in this globalization.
Right. David, in the last part of the show, I want to ask you a very quick question. I'd like to have a quick answer. Mm-hmm. With what's all been happening, we are in Hong Kong right now. Of course, many Hong Kong people enjoy going to Taiwan for the food, or visit friends, see the scenery. What has all that got to do with Hong Kong, and what do we have to watch out for?
Well, I think first of all, Hong Kong and Taiwan, basically Beijing has offered one country, two system as a solution. So I think through the process, I think Taiwan people need to look at this seriously, politically. Socially, I think Hong Kong people and Taiwan people are very close. We travel almost, this is one of the most popular destinations other than our mainland, to Taiwan. And then our culture is very much same, and so the food culture is very close. It's a lovely place, Taiwan. Taiwan people is very kind and very welcoming for any visitors. Especially, I mean, I have so many friends in Taiwan. Yep. So it's a place. But I think what we learned is that, as I said to my friends in Taiwan in 2019, I said, this is something that you should learn what we have made as a mistake in Hong Kong, because there certainly you have to understand what is the red line.
Thank you, David, for coming tonight to share your insights onto the current crisis happening at Cross Straits. I think all of our viewers will continue to follow this event closely. With that, peace will prevail. Have a good week, stay healthy, and good night.